again, and I think we have a repeat crowd, right? Yeah. So I'm not repeating all the rules again. We've done that. So gentlemen, you have to hear a little bit of the rules. Basically, you agreed to the guidelines. The guidelines are on the easel out in the galley. 2 minutes opening statement. Mr. Santos, I think you pulled for number one. Mr. Zimmerman, you'd be second on the opening. A minute and a half for each of the questions, and then the close again in that order. You would close first for 2 minutes, and you would close second for 2 minutes. The audience knows we'll applaud at the beginning, we'll applaud at the end. They will try really, really, really hard not to interrupt because it takes away from your time. Okay? We appreciate your being here. There are questions that were prepared in advance. We're also getting questions up here. If you have any, please submit them in the next 15 minutes because otherwise I can't feed them in with the other questions. But we'd like to hear a variety of statements and opinions from you both. People are here to learn. People will be viewing it afterwards to learn about your positions. So, civility rules, please. Okay? We don't have rebuttal time. However, again, take notes. Your closing statement is what you want to make of it. You can use it to bring home some points that you feel are important for people to leave with. So, without further ado, why don't we start with, first, we'll cheer. They're here. And Mr. Santos, 2 minutes for your opening statement, please.
Well, thank you very much. My name is George Santos. I'm a 34-year-old, first-generation born American, and only in this country does somebody with my background have the ability to be having the awesome opportunity to run for United States Congress. So I just want to make sure that everybody understands this isn't about me. This isn't about my opponent. This is about everyone in this room. This race is about your livelihoods, your safety, the affordability of our country, the future of our children, the future of our grandchildren. I want to make sure that everybody in this room understands. I want to go to Washington, D.C. to represent you, to be your partner, to be part of the community, your voice. I want to fight for the American dream, the same American dream that my family came here in search of, the same American dream that I live today, and the same American dream that is under siege. We've learned that irresponsible administrations and irresponsible governance leads to chaos. And that's what we're experiencing. Crime is out of control. It's absolutely dangerous for our kids to commute to work, to go out and have some fun. The cost of energy is out of control. It will be 3 times more expensive this year to heat our homes for the winter. It is more expensive by 2x to fill up our gas tanks to commute to work. And let's not forget that inflation is out of control, and every single American is experiencing a 10% pay cut, whether you like it or not, because our current administration does not understand how to govern responsibly without overspending and going above and beyond to do everything that they should not be doing. So I want everybody in this room to know that those are my grounds, those are my rules, that's what I will work to deliver for you all. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Zimmerman, your opening statement.
Good evening. First, I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters for bringing us together and give a special shout out to my Great Neck League of Women Voters. So excited. They've brought back their chapter and it's thriving and moving forward. Now, we were asked to describe ourselves for those who are visually impaired before we speak. So let me just say very quickly, I'm wearing a navy blue suit, American flag pin on my lapel. I'm 5'9.5". I'd like to say 5'10", but it's the league and I got to be straight. I have salt and pepper hair, quite frankly, more salt than pepper. And George Santos is the better looking one of the two of us. That being said, I want to thank the league for bringing us together tonight at a very critical time, both in this campaign and in our nation's history. In fact, John Meacham, the presidential historian, said this may be the most defining midterm election since the Civil War. In this contest in our 3rd congressional district, it's really a competition and a test of the two values and the two principles that George and I bring together. You know, George has said this election is not about us. Well, in many ways, it's about the values and beliefs and principles that we bring to this congressional district, the principles that we bring to represent you. I'm very proudly a strong advocate of reproductive freedom for women and respecting their personal autonomy and standing up for their reproductive rights. Regrettably, George Santos supports a national ban on abortions with no exceptions, even for New Yorkers, advocates criminalizing, prosecuting doctors and nurses who provide abortion care. I stand for public safety and stand in support of our police. Regrettably, George Santos attended the Stop the Steal rally and actually bragged about paying the legal fees for the insurrectionists whose violence that day resulted in 5 police officers dying. I believe in working in a bipartisan way. That's why I stand in support of the bipartisan infrastructure bill, so critical to all of us. Regrettably, George does not. I look forward to discussing these ideas with you this evening.
Thank you. So, Mr. Zimmerman, the first question,
Sure.
90 seconds to you. And again, just to clarify, the timers have a 30-second triangle. They're going to leave it up so you know, because people look at their notes. We want to make sure you realize so you can finish up with your sentence at the 2 minutes. I'm sorry, minute and a half. So we heard one of you already address this, but it's the number one question on the list that was given to me. With Senator Graham introducing a bill to nationally restrict abortion, it's clear that women's reproductive health is on the docket for the next Congress. How would you vote on his bill? If yes, are there any parts of the Dobbs decision that you vote to overturn? If no, what other legislation would you support to ensure Americans don't lose privacy rights? Mr. Zimmerman first, then Mr. Santos.
Let me be very clear with you. There's no part of the Dobbs decision I respect or support. I would vote in Congress to codify Roe v. Wade. It is absolutely essential because, frankly, the Dobbs decision puts women's lives at risk. In fact, women will die because of that decision. And the bigger concern I have on top of that is that we have to understand the Dobbs decision also opens up a whole range of other cases coming forward that will impact, potentially, marriage equality. I'm a gay man, and I see what it does in terms of impacting my personal privacy. I see what it does in terms of impacting so many other freedoms and personal liberties we have. And frankly, Justice Clarence Thomas laid that out in his opinion, that it would, in fact, lead to overturning so many important achievements for the LGBTQ plus community and also infringe upon contraceptive rights. So let's be very clear. I will work very hard to codify Roe v. Wade if elected. I will support the Women's Health Protection Act, because when I'm standing up for reproductive freedom for women, I'm standing up for women's health, I'm standing up for the right to privacy, I'm standing up for the gay community, I'm standing up for personal freedom and liberty.
Thank you. Mr. Santos, same question.
As far as the Dobbs decision goes, I believe that the Supreme Court did the right thing by giving the power back to the states and letting each and every state decide for themselves. When you bring issues back to the states, the people have more power. The voice of the people are heard better and louder at local government. This is an empowering moment for women all across the country to advocate for what they believe is best for them. In the state of New York, nothing will change. Nobody's rights are at risk. Nobody's freedoms are at risk in the state of New York. Again, unlike my opponent who likes to put words in my mouth every single time we sit together, I don't do the same for him. I talk about facts. He likes to fabricate and misguide the public into talking for me. So I will remain the course of focusing on everyone here, and I will remain on the course of not going into distractions and making sure that everybody in this room knows nothing changes for you in New York State. I will support the decision of the Supreme Court to maintain the Dobbs decision deferred back to the states, or the 10th Amendment is upheld and each and every person will be able to fight for what they believe in. And we see that in New York. Nothing's going to change, and I'll remain to be that way. As far as Lindsey Graham's bill, I will not vote for it. It is no longer a federal matter.
Thank you. Mr. Santos, the next question starts with you. By all measures, the U.S. economy is headed for a recession. To tame the skyrocketing cost of gas, heating fuel, groceries, etc., interest rates have been hiked to cool demand. If the recession lasts longer than a couple of months, what legislative actions would you consider?
We need to end the war on producing energy in the United States. That is the cause of our inflation. That is what is leading this country into a recession. Make no mistake, let it be clear, my opponent will be a rubber stamp for that same agenda that will continue to hurt each and every one of you in this room. 10% of inflation is a 10% pay cut in each and every one of your pockets. What we need to work towards is producing energy domestically. We're the cleanest place on earth to produce energy. We have EPA standards in local, state, and federal levels. And we're able to produce that energy, create jobs. We're able to also deliver an economy of which we won't be reliant on foreign energy. For instance, Saudi Arabia, Venezuela. These are nations who have committed humanitarian crimes, and we want to go support them financially now. So this is what this administration is doing, is essentially empowering people who have a long history of criminal activity, and that's exactly what my opponent is for. I believe in renewable energy, I believe in a green economy, but I don't believe in absolutism, and I do not believe in extremism, unlike my opponent who wants to extremely eradicate fossil fuel. So this is why we're in the mess we're in today, and this is what I will propose in Congress.
Mr. Zimmerman.
First, George, let me just say, I'm not putting words in your mouth when I quote your record. I'm actually putting the words that come out of your mouth in numerous television interviews and radio interviews and newspaper interviews you've done. And it's important to do that because this election is about choices. It's about choices that are going to impact our future as a nation, impact our future here on Long Island. When I talk about inflation, this is not a political or partisan debate to me. I'm a small business owner for 33 years. I know what inflation means, both to small business owners, to young people, to families trying to get back on track after COVID, and to our seniors. And so there are several steps that have to be taken that I think are critical in the short term. First, we have to find ways to lower costs. I support a national gas tax holiday. I think that's essential. I think also, quite frankly, I was very proudly a supporter of the legislation that was just signed into law that reduced the cost of prescription drugs for our seniors on Medicare. So that, in fact, insulin was capped at $35 a month. And out-of-pocket prescription drugs were capped at $2,000 a year. Still too high, but it was coming down. That was a piece of legislation that George opposed. I support the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which is essential for creating jobs and reinvesting in our economy, essential for protecting our water supply in our region, and in fact, protecting the Long Island Sound. Regrettably, George opposed that as well. So these are critical steps, and as a member of Congress, I would be addressing price gouging, because the profits that are being raked in by various industries, including oil and the meatpacking industry, are disgraceful and exploitive. So there are many steps I'll be taking to address this economic crisis we're facing.
Okay. Mr. Zimmerman, you start with the next question. There's two parts. Do you consider Joe Biden the legitimately elected president? And do you consider the events of January 6th an insurrection, or was there any justification?
You know, it is really one of the most important issues that faces our nation, because the whole debate around the Stop the Steal issue about the election results is nothing more than a political effort to undermine our democracy, diminish, really violate, if not destroy our Constitution for political gain. It was a very tragic period for our nation. And it's an issue that truly provides a very stark difference between George Santos and myself. Donald Trump's own top advisors, his attorney general, his director of election security, his FBI director, all said the election was free and fair and secure, and there wasn't any level of corruption that would have overturned it. Yet George Santos participated in the big lie, attended the Stop the Steal rally, actually defended on video the right of the insurrectionists to be in the Capitol. The people who were literally running through the halls, chanting, "Hang Mike Pence," and building a gallows to hang him. Engaging in such terrible violence that I mentioned, 5 police officers died. And even when he lost his election against Tom Suozzi by 13%, he claimed that was also stolen from him. Let's be very clear. Protecting our democracy is essential. Making sure that we have, and this is really what comes down to, making sure we always put our Constitution and our electoral process ahead of political ambition and political gain. That's my commitment to you.
Mr. Santos.
Again, my opponent continues to speak for me and put words in my mouth. I think it's amazing how he makes this all about him and myself. I acknowledge Joe Biden as the rightful winner of the election, not the choice I made at the ballot box, and I stand by that today. Specifically, in the state of our country, I think I made the right choice not voting for Joe Biden. However, it's worthy to note that I never declined the results of the 2020 election. I never supported violence on January 6th. As a matter of fact, I was the first Republican to come out on a public platform on Twitter and say it was a dark day in our country. We needed healing from that point on. Unlike my opponent, who as late as 2016 was denying the 2000 election, saying that Al Gore won the election while he was campaigning for Joe Biden. He likes to keep that a secret, but he's an election denier far longer than most people in this room who might believe that. He's a trendsetter himself, so I applaud him for having the audacity to say that I declined the results of the election in 2020. Joe Biden won the election. He wasn't my choice. However, I respect the fact that he holds the office of President of the United States. I respect the office of the President of the United States, and I want him to be successful because his success is the success of every single person in this room and every single person in this country. And I wish him nothing but the best, and I hope he starts to change his attitude and guide us in the right direction.
Okay, thank you. Next question, Mr. Santos, you'll start with this. With crime surging, law enforcement has been spotlighted. Does reducing crime require more spending on policing? What have you done to support law enforcement in the past, and what policies will you support for in Congress to reduce crime?
I have stood by law enforcement side by side in the front lines throughout the 2020 demoralization of our law enforcement officers in this country. Matter of fact, I'm the law and order backed candidate in this race, endorsed by every major PBA organization in Nassau County. They unanimously stand behind me because they know I have their back. They know that crime is an epidemic caused by the Democrat Party. My opponent, for instance, is a big funder of Senator Todd Kaminsky, who is the author of bail reform. Matter of fact, gave him $1,000 to support his election for top cop of Nassau County just last year in 2021. And to add insult to injury, he likes to say that I support cop killers. That is a blatant lie, and he should be ashamed of himself for ever suggesting such a thing after all the advocacy work I've done with police unions and all the advocacy work I've done with police benevolent associations. I stand proud to say I am the law and order candidate in this contest, and I will support law enforcement by securing federal funding when every time a local municipality decides to defund the police, I will go to Washington, D.C. and bring them back federal dollars to make sure that our kids are safe, to make sure that every woman and man in this room is safe when they're commuting to and from work or they're engaging in public activities, so they don't need to be worried about crime in our state or in our congressional district.
Mr. Zimmerman?
You know, this issue of public safety and law is so important, and respecting the legal processes in our country is so critical. I just want to refer back to something George said, in that, yes, I did protest the election results in 2000, but unlike George, when the Supreme Court made their decision, I accepted it, and Al Gore conceded. So it's a very important distinction. It's called respecting our electoral process and our constitutional process. Likewise here, let me be very clear with you. I've taken on the extremes in my party, and both extremes actually, in both parties, in terms of standing up in opposition to defunding the police. I've condemned it. I have been a strong advocate for for the fixes in the bail reform, demanding that more judges have greater discretion in awarding penalties and sentencing defendants. Looking at defendants' history, I've stood up and demanded that hate crimes be given not an appearance ticket, but judges have the authority to enforce the full penalty of the law in addressing hate crimes. In fact, because of my leadership for public safety, I've been endorsed by former New York City Commissioner Bill Bratton. And one of the most important ways that in Congress we can ensure public safety is by putting in strong and safe and effective gun safety legislation. It is long overdue. We ban assault weapons, and quite frankly, we have heroes here for gun safety, like Lois Schaefer and Michelle Schimmel, our former Assemblywoman. Both have been champions for gun safety legislation, and unlike George, who doesn't think we need new laws to deal with gun violence, I believe we do.
Thank you. And Mr. Zimmerman, the next question starts with you. Climate-related disasters are increasingly harming the health of Americans. What specific actions will you advocate for to increase the resilience of communities in the face of climate change and to protect community health from climate-related extreme events? Please include what you would support for historically disadvantaged and vulnerable communities. And actually, I'd like to give the gentleman an extra 30 seconds, give them 2 minutes, because you haven't touched on this anywhere yet. Good. And I think it's an important topic to get your opinions on. So, Mr. Zimmerman?
The first step is we have to recognize the climate crisis is real. We've got to respect science. Respect the reality of the facts. There isn't a community in our congressional district that hasn't been impacted by severe weather. Businesses being damaged, homes being flooded, some destroyed. In fact, in the borough of Queens, 11 people died living in substandard apartments because of the flooding that took place a year and a half ago. This is a threat to our national security. It's a threat to our public safety. It's a threat to our quality of life and our future. So I see this as one of the great threats that the world's facing, that we're facing. And so, frankly, I think there are a number of important steps we would take. I strongly supported the most recent legislation that was passed. That was the greatest investment in clean energy union jobs. We have to be prepared to transfer. And they can't do it overnight. I understand in the short term we have to rely upon fossil fuel, and for that matter, domestic drilling is up to 12 million barrels a day, almost the 2019 levels. I don't celebrate that, but in the short term we have to deal with fossil fuel. But in the long term, we've got to expedite permits for solar, wind, turbo, hydropower. Why are we buying solar panels from China? We have to reinvest in domestic manufacturing in our country, so we're prepared for the renewable economy, and we're prepared to deal with the climate crisis. And likewise, so many communities communities that are disadvantaged face extreme dangers. We have to make sure that we reinvest in housing so that these areas are retrofitted and we deal with, that's why, for example, I supported the bipartisan infrastructure bill, because that's money that's going in for our sewer systems. It's going in to make sure that we can, in fact, deal with flooding that is especially impacting lower income communities and impacting the housing stock in these communities. So those are some of the steps I would take that I think are critical to move forward.
Thank you. Mr. Santos?
Recently, a couple of years ago in 2019, the Army engineers wanted to install a floodgate under the Throgs Neck Bridge, which would cause flooding for the people of North Hempstead. I'm not a town of North Hempstead resident. However, I stood in lockstep with everybody in the town of North Hempstead to make sure that that was not installed, and we fended them off. That would have caused chaos and disaster for the people living in the water, surrounding waters. Climate is a cycle. We've gone through numerous ice ages, and we have been able to come back as a planet. It's a fact. You can look at me all you want, Robert. It's a fact. So the reality is what my opponent doesn't like to address is the fact that you can do all you want and you can do all the virtue signaling. The reality is at what cost? Yes, I want clean air. Yes, I want clean water. Yes, I support infrastructure to stop seepage into the Long Island Sound. Yes, I support all those things. But at the end of the day, the reality is the Democrat Party is in one-party rule in Washington, D.C. They have had the opportunity for the last 20 months to perform and deliver on all their promises on climate change, and yet they have delivered nothing substantial substantial, nothing that has materialized, and nothing that has caused or started to roll into a result towards climate change. So again, I'm not perfect. I don't think my opponent is, but I really want to see the Democrat Party step up to the plate and deliver on their promises on climate change.
Okay, thank you. We've already started talking about things that need federal funding, and I believe you both have referred to endorsing some funding of different things that are needed. Where's the money going to come from, Mr. Santos?
Well, it's simple. You need to go into Washington, D.C., and you need to stop the wasteful spending. There's bills that are funded in D.C. through ominous spending bills that make absolute no sense. I'll give a quick example on a very interesting bill. There was a bill passed, meshed in as pork, for an ominous spending bill earlier this year that included gender studies, a total of $20 million for gender studies on primates in the country of Pakistan. This is a fact. That is wasteful spending. That is money that can be spent in public safety. That is money that could be spent in infrastructure. That is money that should be spent in our districts, in our country. We are the country that wastes the most amount of taxpayer dollars. It is time that we stop the wasteful spending and we start delivering results and bringing the money back to our districts. Democrats have a long history of overspending our money and putting us into further financial chaos. I believe that we go there, we start cutting spending on wasteful and reappropriating it towards things that make sense, towards actionable results that will deliver immediate results to the communities. It's a common sense thing to say. I'm not saying that I'm going to remove lifelines or anything. I'm just suggesting we look at what's real and what's not, what's urgent and what's not, and that's how we bring the money back for the various projects we're talking about.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Zimmerman.
Well, George and I both agree we're all against wasteful spending. And that's been the mantra from Washington for generations. Now let's deal with the issue seriously. Now let's deal with the issue intelligently. Of course we don't want to have wasteful spending. But we also have to recognize when spending is relevant and essential for investing in our nation. The infrastructure bill that was put forward that I support, that George does not, that was a very critical investment in terms of building our economy, in terms of retrofitting sewage treatment plants, building our roads, addressing bridge issues with the construction of our bridges, making sure we can reinvest to make sure we can protect our water supply, deal with the unfunded mandates that so many water districts have to face. So that's one critical effort. Most recently, there was a bill passed that just signed into law recently. It was the largest investment in dealing with the climate crisis in the history of our nation. So, George, when you talk about where are the results, that's one action the Democrats took. I'm glad you want to see action taken. But that was the largest investment in dealing with the climate crisis in our nation's history. That was actually a piece of legislation that also reduced the cost of prescription drugs and lowered health care costs as well, health care premiums. The way it was paid for was they went to the top corporations earning over $1 billion, and they raised the corporate tax by a modest amount. I guarantee you those corporations aren't going out of business, but they're finally paying a bit of their fair share so that we can build a stronger economy, an economy addressing the energy crisis, and we can begin to provide some relief for our senior citizens.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Zimmerman again. On money, New York sends more money to Washington than gets back. For both of you, actually, if elected as a member of Congress, can you do anything about it? Would you advocate for something in particular?
Well, actually, I've got a fun fact for you. For the first time that anyone can recall, New York actually got back more this year under Senator Schumer's leadership than we actually paid in. Mm-hmm. That's a remarkable, I think it was a modest amount, but we got more money back than we paid in. And that's this is based upon the Pat Moynihan model, where he outlined how New York pays far more into our country than we get back in return. But there are several steps I think I would take. First and foremost is restoring the state and local tax deduction. That is absolutely essential. It was outrageous it was ever taken away from us. And by denying it to us, it is a double taxation that we're all facing. So restoring the state and local tax deductions is very, very critical. So that's the first step I would take. Secondly, I think we have to also expand upon many of the programs and services. We have unique needs in the state of New York because of our size, because of the fact that we're a destination that the world wants to be in. And under Senator Schumer's leadership and with Congressman Swazi's leadership, we did receive more federal aid back and more federal support for our programs and services. So I think that's got to be done too. It's a tough issue, let's face it. The Congress, in particular, Republican partisans have, in fact, Ron DeSantis voted against federal aid to us after Superstorm Sandy. Then, of course, he came to the Democratic leadership and asked for support after their tragic hurricane, which New York Democrats stood up and provided support for. We have to be able to, by working in a coalition, make sure that we get more aid back for our needs and services in the state.
Thank you. Mr. Santos, same question.
Mr. Zimmerman and I don't agree ever most on issues, but we both agree on the SALT deduction. It is a right that should be restored, and I've been on the front lines and advocating for the SALT reinstation because we are amongst the highest taxed areas in the country. It is absolutely unfair and uncalled for that we are penalized. Period. It was a bad political decision on the former administration. I stood up for it. I stood up to it. It was my own party. But again, that's because that transcends party lines, and my loyalty is with the people, not with my party. I will stand up to them at every given opportunity. We need to fight. We need to fight to bring more money back into New York State. New York State is in a unique position. It is a large state. It is a large footprint and a large demographic. And in fact, yes, the whole world wants to be us so bad that they're crawling over each other in the southern border and making their way up here. So that's a reality. That's flooding our infrastructure. That's flooding our schools. That's taking away from our children, that's taking away from every service that we have access to. The reality, let's be very clear. We need representatives that will speak up, that will stand up to fight for New York. I'm that fighter. I fought my entire career, my entire life to go from that kid in the basement apartment of Jackson Heights to being able to be a successful businessman running for Congress in the United States of America. I will not deliver short of that in the House of Representatives when fighting for funding for our district.
Okay, thank you. Moving on, Mr. Santos. The only Americans happy with our health system are usually healthy. What legislative reforms might tame prices that are increasing faster than other sectors, price gouging and profits higher than other sectors, burnout that is driving doctors and nurses out of their professions, and medical debt burdening 40% of Americans, not to mention most Americans not having access to routine health care? What would you do to enlarge public and congressional support for what you favor?
As far as healthcare goes in our country, we have a fundamental problem with healthcare in the United States. The United States has been relying almost by 40% largely on emergency medicine. That means people are only going to see a healthcare provider when they're in a state of emergency and they show up at the emergency room. That is the highest form of healthcare in our country, due to when hospitals deem it's an emergency and they get to charge essentially what they feel like. It's not regulated. That's because Congress has failed to come to a consensus to create a program, a tier program where people pay what they can afford to receive health care, right? A lot of people like to compare that, a tier system, to Obamacare, but Obamacare failed because in its algorithm, it failed to equate cost of living, demographic, area in which that health care recipient is receiving health care. For instance, somebody receiving health care in the city of New York has a much higher cost of living and can afford a lot less of their income to pay back into the Obamacare than compared to somebody living in rural Kentucky who they have a much smaller cost of living. We need to hold Big Pharma accountable. We need to hold hospital and medical providers accountable. That's why I want to make sure and make it clear. I do not accept money from lobbyists in the pharma industry. I do not accept money from pharmaceutical companies and corporate PACs in pharma, because I want them to remember me as their worst nightmare when they wake up and go to sleep, because I will not be bought by them.
I had asked you please not to interrupt. We need to get to as many topics as possible. Thank you. Mr. Zimmerman.
George did a very good job laying out the problems. Let's talk about solutions. And yes, the arguments he laid out against the arguments he laid out against the Affordable Care Act, that's what you heard from the right wing against Medicare. That's what you heard from them about Social Security, for that matter. But we are dealing with a healthcare crisis in our country. Let's not in any way minimize that. It certainly became increasingly worse during the healthcare pandemic, when literally 23 million people lost their healthcare coverage because they lost their jobs. It's a challenge we have to face from a humanitarian level and from an economic level. That's why I support Medicare for all, because we have to guarantee a baseline level of health care for every citizen in this country. That doesn't mean you put the health insurance industries out of business. People could treat Medicare for all like people handle Medicare today. Medicare is a baseline coverage, and people can buy supplemental insurance as they see fit, as many people do. But that's an essential first step we have to put in place. We also have to make sure that Medicare is protected and enhanced, as is Social Security. And that's a real debate in this next Congress. George Santos has advocated privatizing Social Security. That would end the system as we know it. Republicans talk about in the Congress the idea of putting up Medicare for renewal every 5 years. That's unacceptable. And we still know that they're still working to abolish the Affordable Care Act with the improvements it put in place, including making sure people with pre-existing conditions were covered. So we have to build upon the past successes, and there are real solutions we can put in place to get that done.
Thank you. We talked earlier about crime and police funding, law enforcement, but a lot of the questions have related to the concern about domestic terrorism and extremism, both as a result of social media and rumors, potentially an offshoot of the January 6th event. Could you speak to that issue, Mr. Zimmerman?
Our FBI director, appointed by President Trump, still in the position under President Biden, made the point that domestic terrorism is one of our probably our number one threat in terms of national security, led by white supremacy. Think about that for a moment, what that threat represents. And we have to be able to address that by, in fact, and I've been a strong advocate of this, taking on the extremes in my own party. We have to increase our support for police. We've got to be able to reinvest in our police to provide them better equipment, better opportunities, and better training to deal with, for example, with hate crimes that we see rising to a tragic level, confronting so many segments of our society. We have to be able to provide much stronger oversight of social media and the way it's being used to spread misinformation and destroy people's minds, pollute people's minds. So we have to recognize that domestic terrorism is a very real threat. We have to recognize what white supremacy means, and we've got to stand up to extremism. Regrettably, George Santos has embraced Marjorie Taylor Greene. She's the QAnon congresswoman, and he put out the woman who's even been denounced for her own Republican leadership for her hateful rhetoric. And he put out on Twitter, he regards her as a personal friend. He likes her better than a lot of other Republicans. We've got to stand up to the kind of hateful, divisive rhetoric that we've heard from Marjorie Taylor Greene and those who embrace extremists and empower them.
Mr. Santos.
My opponent is obsessed with me, I'm convinced. The reality is clear. Extremism comes from Letitia James. Extremism comes from accepting an endorsement of the Working Families Party, as my opponent has accepted, who makes you take a pledge to denounce and defund the police. That is the party that my opponent has accepted the endorsement from. Make no mistake. Extremism is a cancer, and I will root it out, and I will work along law enforcement to root it out of our communities, out of our society, and I will work diligently to eradicate that from our country. It is not up for negotiation. We can do that by funding. Instead of funding 87,000 IRS agents and weaponizing them against the middle class of the United States, we can go fund police task force to go look and go through social media and to go into mental facilities and make sure that people aren't being let out without proper diagnosis, so that they don't go out into the street and create and cause crimes and commit crimes of acts of horror against us. The reality is, my opponent has decided to align himself with every single extreme fringe person in the Democrat Party, from our lieutenant governor and our governor, who refuses to unseat the Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg, who refuses to literally prosecute criminals, and he's accepted the endorsement of the Working Families Party, and he's funded Todd Kaminsky to become the top cop of Nassau County, the man who authored bail reform and made us less safe. Talk about extremism and terrorism.
Okay, Mr. Santos. One of you referred to immigration earlier, and I'd like to explore not just immigration policy, and most of the noise we hear is about the border, about immigrants being bused or flown to, quote, sanctuary cities, other parts of the country. But also, we keep hearing about the economy and the need for more workers, and legitimately admitted immigrants with special visas are also not being allowed in. Mm-hmm. The foreign student count is down at universities, and they're losing money. So I'd like each of you to speak to the economic side of the immigration debate as well. So, Mr. Santos, if you would start.
Legal, qualified immigration is encouraged. That's how my parents came here. That's a result of our country. That's how most of you came here. That's what America's about. I stand for legal, qualified labor. I stand for legal immigration. I have no opposition to legal immigration or to bringing in temporary visas, working visa recipients into our country to help us in various sectors of our economy. The only problem that we have is the immigration system is flooded with the floodgates that are taking place in the southern border, hence creating a backlog on allowing the immigration agency to be able to perform their duties to admit people, to submit, to accept visas, to issue visas. It's chaotic what's going on in our country. The administration has its priorities upside down. And the reality is I've always encouraged legal immigration. My opponent's going to probably say something along the lines of that I want to build a wall of Jerusalem around the country. I don't know what he's going to say, but I just want to set the record straight that this is going to be the most consequential election, because it is between a person who understands finance and economics and is somebody who wants to just virtue signal and dog whistle and spew hate and rhetoric just like my opponent does.
Mr. Zimmerman, your turn.
What it's really about in this debate is about facts, reality, and putting our statements and our positions on the record for all of you to judge. Just a year and a half ago, George Santos was actually advocating ending for a period of time legal immigration. Now he says he supports legal immigration. I'm glad to see that he's changed his point of view on that. But in order to have an open, fair election, we have an obligation to be honest with you about our positions and consistent in expressing our positions to you. That's why, frankly, sometimes I've got to bring up where George and I differ and where our records differ, because that's how you make an informed decision. Let me be very clear. The issue of immigration historically has been a bipartisan issue. At one point, there were 68 votes in the Senate to deal with the immigration crisis. John McCain and Lindsey Graham working with the Obama administration. Peter King, for example, Republican conservative Congress member from Long Island, actually advocates a pathway for citizenship for the undocumented who are living in our country, in addition to advocating border security. Very frankly, my position is clear. I have always been, and they're going back to 2006, a strong advocate for border security. That's essential for our society. We also have to have a pathway for undocumented people living in our country to achieve citizenship, and we have to improve our asylum system. The people who are here being shipped in buses are here legally. They came here to claim asylum. That's in our Constitution. But we have to have more judges, process these cases faster, because the backlog has grown to over 700,000. I think the Biden administration's got to do a lot more in terms of addressing that issue.
Okay, Mr. Zimmerman. The given current rates of inflation may cause some legislators to seek to reduce funding to vital programs that serve children and vulnerable families. These programs include the Maternal and Child Health Bureau that helps provide maternal and newborn care, and nutritional programs like SNAP and WIC. Mm-hmm. What is your level of commitment to maintaining or increasing funding for these vital programs?
They're absolutely more essential than ever before, especially as in this difficult economic time we're facing as a nation. You know, it's a very curious thing. When the Trump tax bill was put through, the Trump tax cuts were put through a couple of years back, and Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell and Kevin McCarthy said, don't worry, it'll pay for itself. It produced a deficit of between $1.5 trillion to $2 trillion. No one complains, no, you don't hear any Republicans complaining about that debt, about the deficit it created. But they're the first ones to kill the child tax credit that would put bring 30% of our children living in poverty out of poverty. Or they go after SNAP, or they talk about ways to cut Medicare. Or like George, they advocate privatizing Social Security. Let's understand what's at stake in our society right now. It's important for us to come together as a community to protect our middle class, to build a stronger middle class. And that doesn't mean you target programs that, in fact, will make it more difficult for people to live in this economic crisis. It means we have to, in fact, make sure that those corporations at the top tier pay their fair share, and make sure, in fact, that there's greater accountability so these programs are protected and they're implemented fairly and accurately.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Santos?
Welfare is a lifeline, and it's a lifeline that I would never bring to defund or to underfund. I do believe that the welfare system needs an audit to stop wasteful spending so that the people who truly need the assistance and the lifeline that it's created and to support have it when they need it. That is what's at stake. Is the difference is we can either close our eyes and pretend that it runs well, or we can open our eyes and audit it, fix it, repurpose the funding that is being wasted on fraudulent claims for assistance. That is what takes place in that system. Look, as a child, as a kid who came from a household who received welfare at one point, I can tell you there's nothing more powerful to get off of it and do something with your life and be able to be successful and pay taxes back into the system to contribute to that same system that helped you and your family. So under no circumstances would I ever attack welfare. I would never attack any of the lifelines. We need to help people when they need it the most, and that's what this program is there for, but we need to be responsible, audit it, and make sure that the right people are the recipients of the program so that there's no advantage being taken in the system.
Thank you. We have time for one more short question, one line, and then we'll go to the closing statements. Sure. So, Mr. Santos, if you are elected, what one policy or reform will you dedicate yourself to every day?
The one bill that I have ingrained that I want to bring to the next docket is to end the bonanza of insider trading in Washington, D.C. Every single person in this room is affected by the fact that the House of Representatives and its members are too worried about special interest. I want to present a bill in the next Congress to ban individual stock trading for members of Congress, their spouses, and their immediate family members to end the nonsense and end the party. Party's over. Because the moment you do that, the job becomes a lot less interesting, and they're going to have to focus on us, we, the people of the United States, and work for us, and deliver results for us, and lower our taxes, and increase the quality of life for our children, and create opportunity for our children, and better our education system. Education is a springboard out of poverty. I am a witness to that. I am proof of that. The American dream must be defended at all costs. So I will fight to end special interests in Washington, D.C., and make Congress work for us.
Thank you. Mr. Zimmerman?
Well, you know, the first way you fight special interests in Washington, D.C. is make a personal pledge that you'll put your assets into a blind trust if you're elected. I've made that pledge to do so. Plus, I will sell my business back to my business partners, and so I'll be totally out of my business as well. I support the legislation that would, in fact, ban insider trading, but more than that, or ban stock trading by members of Congress, but more than that, I've made a pledge not to take any corporate political action committee money. George talks about the pharmaceutical industry. How about all the other industries? Because the system right now in Washington is members of Congress bankroll their campaigns from the very industries they have to oversee and regulate. So I've taken a pledge that most members of Congress have not taken, where I will not take corporate money, corporate political action committee money in any form for my campaign. Now, to your point, I think it's so important to bring up, my major mission in my first term in Congress is making sure the funds that have been appropriated are allocated back here to our constituents in the 3rd Congressional District. Congress is very big on appropriating money, But then how do we make sure the funds for the infrastructure bill come back here? How do we make sure the support systems that we need for our communities come back here? That's my mission, to make sure that we can deliver. And frankly, I have a history of working in a bipartisan way with Republicans, both in local government and in Congress. Peter King in particular, and Don Clavin, the Hempstead supervisor. George, I don't think you can point to one Democrat in Congress or one Democratic local official that will ever say you made any effort to work in a bipartisan way to deliver results for our communities.
Okay, gentlemen, you have 2 minutes. I know you'd like to have 10 minutes, but it's 2 minutes. Make your closing statement. Sell yourself. Get their vote. Mr. Santos.
I'm going first.
Yep, it's the same order.
I just want...
Yeah, wait a minute. Yeah, same order as the beginning.
I just wanted to thank everybody for coming out. Politics is boring. This is a tedious process. I appreciate your participation and your engagement. I do want to remember, this campaign is about you. Every aspect of my campaign is about each and every one of you, and I will remain that way when I have the awesome honor to represent you in New York's 3rd Congressional District. But don't kid yourself. You have a choice to make. The choice is simple. My opponent tonight highlighted that he wants to create a national gas tax holiday, which would increase inflation. He would like to have a Medicare for All plan, which would increase inflation. He's also in the past advocates for a $50,000 student debt relief, which would add over $500 billion into the national debt. I want to reduce inflation. I want to deliver a simple life. I want to deliver affordability. I want to deliver prosperity. I want your children and your grandchildren to experience the same American dream my family and I experienced. I want to make sure that that's protected. I want to make sure that you all understand that in me, you'll have a fighter. The same kid who went from the basement in Jackson Heights all the way to working in the financial services industry, and today is able to have the awesome opportunity to run for United States Congress. Only in this country, and I want to remain this country that same way, and my commitment to you that I will be your partner, your friend, and your biggest advocate in Washington, D.C., in the sea of corruption and dismay that place is. So I thank you very much for being here. I thank you very much for your participation, and I thank you very much for taking the time to deal with two guys here just trying to sell themselves to everyone else. So I appreciate you very much.
Hold your applause, though. We're going to applaud at the end. Okay. Mr. Zimmerman.
Yes, I want to thank the League as well for bringing us all together this evening at such a defining time in our country's history. And you know, George says this election's about you. I see it a little differently. This election is about what George and I would do for you, what we stand for, what we believe in. I don't think you can just try to hide from the issues or hide from taking positions by just saying, well, it's just up to you. It's up to how we can best serve you. That's the real issue here. And in fact, you know, we talk a lot about the American dream. Let me tell you what my American dream is. My American dream is having a Congress that will stand up to the epidemic of gun violence in our nation and ban assault weapons, and put in place stronger background checks, put in place efforts to red flag laws nationally, and make sure that we can address finally the pandemic of gun violence throughout our nation. That's my American dream. My American dream is respecting personal privacy, standing up for reproductive freedom for women, standing up for the rights of the LGBTQ+ community, standing up for individuals' freedoms to love and live how they choose. My American dream is about recognizing science is there, and we put real concrete programs in place to deal with the climate crisis. My American dream is defined by standing up to protect our democracy and our Constitution and respecting the right of the voter and listening to the will of the American people. We have got to stop rationalizing and excusing those who want to embrace extremism, those who want to empower extremism to overturn elections for political gain. It is one of our greatest threats to our society. So I look forward to an America with our best days ahead, and I know we're facing tough times, but by standing up for each other, by working together, as we have, and I have throughout my life in a bipartisan way, we can build coalitions that can deliver services we used to in our country. I've done that in my life. As I mentioned, I've done that with Peter King on the 9/11 Zaroga relief bill. I've done that on the pandemic, working with Republican governments and Democratic governments on Long Island, because by working together, working in a bipartisan way, we can truly help achieve the American dream. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, man.
Good job. Good job.